I've been invisible my whole life, but tonight someone finally saw me. The words tore out of Sofia Sinclair before she could stop them. The diner booth smelled like burnt coffee and wet linoleum, the checkered floor reflecting the neon open sign that buzzed and flickered through the downpour hammering the plate glass window. 3 in the morning. The clock above the register showed the time in sickly green digits. Emma's weight against her shoulder felt like the only real thing in the world. The 8-year-old's breath was soft and trusting, her small hand wrapped around a napkin Sofia had folded into a crane 20 minutes ago. Outside, lightning split the sky like a blade through darkness. Then the door opened. Rain swept across the threshold in sheets. A man entered, tall and commanding, his black cashmere coat dripping onto the linoleum. 6'3". Dark hair slicked back. Eyes like storm clouds scanning every booth with the intensity of someone hunting for something stolen. He was beautiful and terrifying and out of place in this broken diner where the vinyl seats were held together with duct tape and the coffee was hours old. His gaze swept past 2 truckers, past the night manager counting drawer receipts, past everything. Then it landed on Emma. His entire body went rigid. His hand gripped the booth edge, knuckles bone white against the laminate table. The leather of his coat creaked as his shoulders tensed. "Emma," he whispered. The name broke in his throat like glass. Sofia's left arm throbbed where the bruise spread purple-black beneath her long sleeve, hidden like always, the way she hid everything that hurt. But when she shifted Emma's weight to protect the child, when her movements became careful and guarded, he saw her flinch. He saw the protection of old pain written across her face. His expression changed. Softened. Shattered. His dark eyes moved from the sleeping child to the woman beside her, and something shifted in his chest. Something cold and dangerous became something else entirely. His hand released the booth edge. He stood there, drenched and trembling, looking at a child he believed dead for 2 years. Sofia did not know that this man was Nicholas Caruso, that his name meant power and violence in every corner of Seattle's underworld. She did not know that his brother had taken Emma from his penthouse on a winter night 2 years ago, had disappeared into the darkness, had left nothing but rage and a void that no amount of revenge could fill. She did not know that in 48 hours, the people who had kept her trapped in poverty would be dragged into federal custody with their hands bound and their empires crumbling. What she did know was that he was looking at her with recognition. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning, to 3 hours earlier when Sofia Sinclair had $78 left in the world and no idea her life was about to change forever. The dinner shift at Moretti's had ended the way it always ended. Sofia stood in the employee bathroom, staring at the crumpled bills in her apron pocket. $17. The register had been busy all night. The tip jar should have been full. But Douglas Hale, the manager with slicked back hair and a wedding ring he wore like a weapon, had taken them all. Again. She knew better than to ask. She had learned that lesson 8 years ago from a man who had called his fists love, who had mapped scars across her back that she still traced sometimes in the dark, thinking maybe she deserved them. Douglas Hale was different. He used words instead. Words were sharper than fists because they left no marks anyone could see. "You earn $22 tonight," he had said, counting through the tips with her standing beside him. "But 3 tables didn't tip because of your attitude. So we'll call it 17. You should be grateful I'm being generous." The math made no sense. Nothing about Douglas Hale made sense. But she had become very good at accepting things that did not make sense. Acceptance was survival. Acceptance meant Emma stayed alive. Acceptance meant she did not end up like the other girls from the shelter, the ones who fought back, the ones whose names appeared in obituary columns. Sofia counted her money 3 times. $17 in the apron. She had $61 hidden in the lining of her mattress at home, underneath where she kept the first pair of shoes Emma had worn at the shelter. She had found the baby shoes in a donation box on Emma's 5th birthday, had held the tiny leather things in her hands and wept because they meant someone, somewhere, had wanted this child to be safe. $78 total. She needed $35,000 in 3 days. The math was not close. The math was a canyon. She clocked out at 11:30 and walked to the bus stop, a uniform still damp from carrying trays through the dinner rush. The rain fell in sheets. Her coat was missing 2 buttons, and the November wind tore through the gaps like a blade wrapped in ice. She was 28 years old but looked closer to 40, her hands calloused from years of scrubbing other people's homes before the shelter, her eyes hollow from counting pennies that never added up to enough. The bus came 15 minutes late. She rode it for 40 minutes to the part of Seattle where the houses sagged and the streetlights flickered. The shelter was 3 blocks from the bus stop, a converted Victorian mansion that smelled like industrial cleaner and broken dreams. Emma was asleep in the dormitory room they shared with 5 other children and 1 other woman. Her small face was peaceful, her hands tucked beneath her chin. Sofia changed into dry clothes and lay beside the child, watching her breathe. This was love. This careful witnessing of someone else's survival. This willingness to become invisible if it meant someone else could be safe. She did not sleep. She rarely slept anymore. At 4 in the morning, her phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Chen, the social services officer who had first brought Emma to the shelter. Sofia's hands shook as she read it. The text said, "Need to talk about Emma's case. Federal custody hearing scheduled for 3 days. If no approved foster family arrangement is finalized by then, she goes into the system. Call me tomorrow. 3 days. $78. $35,000 needed to file the formal paperwork, to hire the lawyer, to make it official. She had already called every legal aid office in Washington state. They had all laughed or hung up. $35,000 was the cost of keeping Emma safe. $35,000 was the cost of being visible instead of invisible. Sofia lay in the darkness and made a decision that would change everything. She would not wait for help. She would not pray for rescue. She would do what invisible people always do. She would break herself into smaller and smaller pieces until she fit into the shape the world demanded. At 11 o'clock the next morning, she was back at Moretti's, clocking in for a double shift. The diner smelled like grease and coffee and the particular exhaustion of people working jobs that did not pay enough. Douglas Hale watched her from his office with a smile that made her skin crawl. "Double shift today, Sofia?" he asked, leaning against the counter. "Yes," she said. Her voice barely a whisper. "Good girl." He said it the way someone speaks to a dog. "Your table by the window needs water." She moved through the day like a ghost. Quiet, faithful, invisible. She carried trays that were heavier than her body, cleaned tables with her hand submerged in water so hot it burned, and smiled at customers who looked through her as if she did not exist. By 6 o'clock, her feet were bleeding inside her shoes. By 9 o'clock, her hands were shaking. By 11 o'clock, she knew she would die before she earned $35,000. But Emma was asleep at the shelter, and Emma needed her to try. At midnight, Sofia was still at Moretti's, wiping down the counter that never stayed clean. Douglas Hale appeared beside her, and his proximity made her throat close. "The tips from your tables tonight," he said, and he placed $3 on the counter. $3 for 6 hours of work. "This is not right," Sofia heard herself say. The word surprised them both. "What did you say?" His voice became something cold and sharp. "Nothing," she whispered. "I am sorry." "You should be." He leaned closer, and she could smell his cologne, the same expensive smell that made her chest tight. "You should be very grateful I keep you employed. Your kind doesn't usually qualify for restaurant work. Most people look at someone like you and they see liability. They see a woman who has already been used up by life. Do you understand what I am telling you?" She understood. She had always understood. She was nobody, and nobody did not argue about $3. She clocked out at 1 in the morning. The rain was still falling. She was counting the hours until 3 a.m., when she would take her break and walk to the all-night diner on 3rd Avenue, the place where she could sit in a booth for free if she ordered coffee. The place where she could let Emma sleep against her shoulder and pretend, just for an hour, that they were not drowning. She did not know that a black SUV was parked outside the diner where she worked, and that inside it sat a man named Carlo, watching her through the window. She did not know that this man reported to Nicholas Caruso, who had spent 2 years searching for Emma, who had traced the adoption papers and the shelter and the social worker, and who had finally found her. She did not know that her life was about to change. The rain hammered against the diner window like 1,000 tiny fists, each drop a percussion of desperation. Sofia Sinclair sat in the corner booth of Mel's Diner on Aurora Avenue, the plastic seat cracked beneath her, vinyl leaking yellow foam where she had worn through the surface with 6 months of sitting in this exact spot. The checkered floor was black and white, faded to gray, and the neon signs hummed their dying song, pink, blue, green light reflecting off the wet window in streaks of color that looked like tears. Emma slept against her shoulder, the 8-year-old's breathing shallow and even, one small hand curled around Sofia's wrist like she was afraid to let go even in sleep. Sofia had exactly $78 in her pocket. Not 79. Not 80. 78. And she needed $35,000 in 3 days, or Emma would be returned to social services, and they would send her back to find her mother's boyfriend, and Sofia knew what that meant. She had seen it before. She had lived it before. The coffee cup in front of her was nearly empty, just a brown ring at the bottom. She had ordered it at 11:45 p.m., and now it was 1:58 in the morning. The waitress, a woman with kind eyes and tired shoulders, had stopped asking if she wanted anything else. She just topped off the coffee when she passed, and Sofia left dollar bills under the saucer, $1 per hour, the only currency of gratitude she could afford. The storm had come suddenly, turning the humid Seattle summer night into something cold and terrifying. Lightning had split the sky above the Cascade Hotel where Sofia had worked a double shift, where Douglas Hale had stolen $217 from the tip jar and told her she should be grateful, that people like her did not deserve restaurant work at all. She could still feel his breath on her neck, sour with coffee and menace. She could still hear his voice, "Your kind doesn't usually qualify." She had clocked out at midnight, driven 3 blocks to her car, a 1998 Honda with a broken passenger window covered in plastic grocery bags, and sat for 15 minutes in the parking lot, counting the dollars in her wallet. 38 from her own shift in tips, 40 that had been in her account yesterday before the car insurance was due. 78 total. The child's first pair of shoes was in the back seat, wrapped in a plastic bag, worn pink leather with tiny white socks still inside. She had kept them since the day Emma arrived at the shelter 8 years ago, a newborn girl with her umbilical cord still attached, and Sofia, then only a girl herself, 17, broken already, had held her and thought, "I will save her. I will save her from what happened to me." That promise had cost everything. Emma stirred, her small body shifting deeper into the booth. Sofia smoothed her dark hair away from her forehead, and the girl murmured something in her sleep. Not words. Just a sound, small and vulnerable and absolutely everything Sofia had left to live for. The diner smelled like stale coffee and grease that had been ground into the tile and walls for maybe 30 years. Mel's was the kind of place that existed outside time, outside law, outside the world where things made sense. The red vinyl booths were held together with tape. The laminate tables were sticky. The waitresses had cigarettes tucked behind their ears and had stopped being surprised by anything years ago. Sofia had found this place because it was open at 3 in the morning and it did not ask questions. If you bought a coffee, you could sit as long as you needed to. And she needed to sit. She needed to sit somewhere that was not the car, somewhere that felt almost like a home, somewhere she could let Emma sleep against her and pretend, just for an hour, that they were not drowning. She did not know that across the city, in a high-rise office building in downtown Seattle, a man named Nicholas Caruso had just hung up the phone with Carlo, one of his most trusted men. Did not know that Carlo had been sitting in a black SUV outside the Cascade Hotel for 2 hours, watching Sofia through the window as she moved between tables with her head down and her long sleeves covering something that made her flinch every time she raised her left arm. Did not know that Nicholas Caruso had spent 2 years searching for a child named Emma. 2 years of investigators and bribes and favors called in from people who owed him their lives. 2 years since his own brother had taken Emma from him, smuggled her through the foster system, hidden her away in the kind of places where children disappeared into the cracks of the world and were never found again. But the informant had called at 1:35 a.m. with a tip that changed everything. "She is at Mel's diner," the voice had said over the encrypted line. "The girl matches the photograph. Dark hair, about 8 years old, asleep in a booth. She is with a woman, a waitress, very thin, wearing long sleeves." Nicholas had closed his eyes. 14 years he had been building his empire in Seattle. 14 years of loyalty and blood and the kind of power that made men kneel. And in all that time, the one thing he could not buy, could not negotiate, could not force back into existence was Emma. His daughter. The child his brother had sworn was dead, an accident, an apology that came too late for forgiveness. But now the storm was still raging outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office. Lightning split the sky over the city, and the rain fell like bullets against the glass. And in 2 blocks, just 2 blocks away, his daughter was sleeping in a diner booth. He had stood up from his desk without another word, and Carlo would already know what to do. They always knew. In 14 years, his men had learned to read the silence in his voice like a language. They had learned that when Nicholas Caruso moved, mountains fell. When he wanted something, the world bent to accommodate his will. He was pulling on his cashmere coat, black, worth more than Sofia's annual salary, when Carlo texted, "I am moving into position. Gino is 2 minutes out." Sofia did not know that 2 black SUVs were pulling into the parking lot of Mel's diner. That men in dark suits were emerging into the rain, moving with a kind of precision that came from years of military training. That in 5 minutes, maybe less, the door to the diner would open and Nicholas Caruso would step inside, drenched from the storm, his dark eye scanning the booths with the intensity of someone hunting for what was stolen. She only knew that Emma's hand had gone tight on her wrist, and she whispered, "I'll figure it out, baby. I promise. I'll figure it out." And the rain kept falling, like a countdown, like a death sentence, like a sound that meant everything was about to change. At 3:07 in the morning, the diner door opened like a gunshot in the silence. Nicholas Caruso stepped through rain that fell like bullets, water streaming off a cashmere coat worth more than Sofia's annual salary. He was tall, 6'2", with shoulders that seemed to absorb the light itself. Dark hair plastered to his forehead. Dark eye scanning the room with the precision of a man hunting for what was stolen. 2 men followed him into the fluorescent silence. Carlo, broad-chested, with a scar running from his left eyebrow to his jaw. Gino, smaller but built like compressed steel, hands never straying far from the bulge beneath his jacket. They moved like wolves entering a pen. Sofia's body went rigid. Emma's small hand tightened on her wrist, fingers pressing into skin like an anchor. Nicholas stopped at their booth. He stared at Emma. Just stared. His jaw worked silently. When he reached out, his hand trembled, actually trembled, before pulling back. Then reaching again. Stopping inches from the sleeping child's face like he was afraid she might dissolve if he touched her. "That's my daughter," he said. His voice sounded like something breaking. Sofia's arm wrapped tighter around Emma. "Her mother's in jail. Her mother's boyfriend is still looking for her. I'm protecting her." Nicholas sat down slowly, moving like a man made of glass. His eyes never left Emma's face. "Her mother told me Emma died 2 years ago," he said. "Stillborn. Said it was an accident." His hands clenched into fists on the table. "My brother paid her? Paid her to disappear, to tell me my daughter was dead, because he wanted to destroy me. Because I wouldn't give him what he wanted." Carlo and Gino exchanged a glance, the kind of look that passes between men who have worked together so long they communicate in silence. Their hands stayed near their weapons. Their eyes stayed on their boss's face, which was cracking open like ice in spring. "Who are you?" Nicholas asked Sofia. "Nobody," she said. The word came out small. "Broken. I work at the Cascade Hotel. Night shifts. I met Emma 6 weeks ago at the women's shelter. I've been trying to get her into foster care, but I need $35,000 in 3 days and I have $78 left in the world, and she stopped because Nicholas was staring at her left arm. At the way she held it against her body like it might shatter. You're hurt, he said. Not a question. It's nothing. Show me. No. His eyes met hers, and in that moment, Sofia felt something she hadn't felt in 8 years. She felt seen. Actually seen. Not the way men looked at her when they wanted something, not the way her ex-husband had looked at her right before his fist came up, but truly seen. Like this dangerous man had looked straight through her skin and counted every scar. Someone did that to you, Nicholas said. Sofia's throat closed. 8 years of hiding. 8 years of long sleeves in summer. 8 years of moving carefully, protecting her left side, angling away from mirrors because she couldn't bear to see the map of damage written across her back. Why are you protecting my daughter when you have nothing? Nicholas asked. Sofia looked at Emma's sleeping face. At the bruise on the child's collarbone that she'd tried to cover with makeup that morning. At the way Emma still flinched sometimes when people moved too quickly. Because nobody protected me, Sofia whispered. The silence stretched like a living thing. Then Nicholas pulled out his phone. Made one call. His voice was low and controlled, but there was something underneath it, something cold that made the air in the diner feel suddenly thin. I need background on everyone connected to the Cascade Hotel, he said. Douglas Hale. Deanna Whitfield. Financial records. Criminal histories. Everything. I want it by morning. He hung up. Looked at Sofia. The 35,000, he said. Consider it handled. But I need to understand what happened to my daughter, and I need to know who hurt you. Carla returned with bags of food. Real food. Egg sandwiches wrapped in paper. Fresh coffee in ceramic cups, not the stale diner brew. He set everything down quietly and moved back to his position by the door, but his eyes kept flickering to his boss, processing something his mind couldn't quite assemble. The booth became a confessional. Sofia's hand shook around the coffee cup. 8 years ago, I married a man who said he loved me. First time he hit me was on our honeymoon. Said I looked at the waiter too long. Said I was making him jealous. Said he couldn't help it. She paused. The rain drummed against the window. By year 2, my back looked like. She stopped. Like a map of hell, Nicholas finished quietly. Sofia nodded. I left when I was still alive enough to run. Stayed at the shelter where I met Emma 6 weeks ago. Her mother's boyfriend, he reminded me of my ex. The way he moved around the house. The anger that was always just underneath his skin, looking for an excuse. I couldn't let her go back to that. She pulled something from her pocket. 2 tiny pink shoes, worn and faded, barely bigger than her palm. These were mine, she said. From when I was at the shelter the first time, before him. Before everything got dark. I keep them to remember I survived once. To remember I'm not always going to be afraid. Nicholas stared at those shoes like they contained the answer to every question he'd ever asked about loss. You've been protecting my daughter while sleeping in your car, he said. Yes. And someone at your work is stealing from you. Douglas Hale. The restaurant manager. He takes our tips. Says we're lucky to have the jobs. Threatens to fire anyone who complains. His boss is Deanna Whitfield. She owns the Cascade Hotel. She knows what he does. She pays him to keep the staff desperate enough that we won't organize, won't fight back, won't tell anyone. Nicholas pushed a plate toward her. Eat. I can't pay. Eat. She ate. He watched her wince when she reached for the fork, the way she protected her left side, the careful movements of someone whose body had learned to live in pain. The 35,000, Nicholas said. I'll wire it tomorrow. Emma stays with me. You stay somewhere safe until. Why? Sofia interrupted. Her voice cracked. Why would you help me? I'm nobody. I'm homeless. I'm nothing. Nicholas leaned forward. When he spoke, his voice dropped to something dangerous and soft, like a blade wrapped in ice. You saved my daughter when you had $78 and a pair of children's shoes, he said. When my own blood tried to destroy me, when I thought I'd lost everything, you were protecting her. You were choosing her survival over your own. So no. You are not nobody. Not anymore. Gino coughed. Carlo looked away, but not before Sofia saw something shift in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Or the beginning of understanding that something fundamental had changed in their boss tonight. I need you to tell me everything about Douglas Hale and Diana Whitfield, Nicholas said. Every detail. Every threat. Every stolen dollar. Over the next hour, as the rain continued its relentless percussion against the windows, Sofia talked. Douglas Hale was 43 years old, balding, with dead eyes and a wedding ring he never removed. He'd been stealing tips for 6 years. He forced overtime without pay. He touched the younger waitresses and threatened their jobs if they complained. 3 women had quit in tears this year alone. Diana Whitfield was 58, married to a city councilman, built her empire on wage theft and public humiliation. She owned 4 hotels. Paid Douglas specifically to keep the staff too terrified to organize. Nicholas took notes on his phone. Asked questions with the precision of a prosecutor. How much stolen? Sofia calculated quickly. Approximately $47,000 from her alone over 2 years. How many women affected? At least 30. Maybe more. Carlo made calls. Gino watched Emma sleep. Nicholas watched Sofia, and when she shifted wrong and gasped, when she tried to hide the pain by turning it inward, he said quietly, when this is over, you're going to a doctor. I can't afford. You're not paying. Dawn broke over Seattle like a bruise turning colors. Sofia's eyes were heavy. The fluorescent light seemed dimmer now, or maybe she was just too tired to see them clearly. Emma slept through it all, her small body curled against Sofia's ribs, completely trusting, completely safe. Nicholas stood. His men stood with him, perfectly synchronized, a choreography built from years of working in silence. Carlo will take you and Emma to a safe location, he said. Apartment. Fully furnished. Yours for as long as you need. I don't understand, Sofia whispered. You don't owe me anything. Nicholas looked at Emma, then back at Sofia. My brother betrayed me, he said. Sold my family. I had to choose between mercy and survival. I chose survival, and it cost me 2 years with my daughter. He paused. You chose to protect her when survival meant walking away. When protecting her meant staying poor. Staying hurt. Staying scared. He stepped away from the booth. You don't owe me, he said. I owe you. Carlo came around the booth with the gentleness of a man handling something precious. He helped Sofia to her feet. She moved slowly, carefully, and he slowed his pace to match hers. Gino lifted Emma without waking her, cradling the child like she was made of glass. As they moved toward the door, Nicholas called out softly. Sofia. She turned. No one hurts you again, he said. I give you my word. What Sofia didn't know was that at that exact moment, federal agents were already building a case against Diana Whitfield. What she didn't know was that Nicholas Caruso didn't just run a criminal empire, he owned judges, federal prosecutors, and connections that ran so deep into the fabric of Seattle's power structure that when he made one phone call, entire bureaucratic systems mobilized. She didn't know that by tonight, Diana Whitfield would be arrested. That federal agents would find evidence of her financial crimes, 40 years in prison, they would calculate. That Douglas Hale would be charged with assault, battery, and wage theft. that his mugshot would be on every news channel in Washington by morning. She didn't know any of this. She only knew that Carlo was leading her and Emma toward a black SUV waiting in the rain. She only knew that for the first time in 8 years, someone powerful had chosen to protect her instead of hurt her. She only knew that she wasn't invisible anymore. Sofia sat on the edge of the bed in the new apartment, sunlight streaming through windows she didn't have to cover anymore, and watched Emma arrange stuffed animals on a clean carpet. The rain from the night before had stopped. The morning felt too quiet, too safe, like a held breath before the next blow falls. Her phone rang at 9:27 a.m. Douglas Hale's voice came through like a blade. "You think you can just disappear? You owe me money. 3 weeks of tips you pocketed. I have it all documented." Sofia's hand trembled. 8 years of this man's threats lived in her muscles. "I didn't take anything. You stole from me. Who's going to believe you?" His laugh was poison. "A homeless woman with nothing? I'm filing a report with the police. I'm telling them you stole from the register. I'm telling them you're unstable. You have until tonight to come back to work and settle this, or I'm pressing charges." The line went dead. Sofia's breathing came shallow and fast. She looked at her left arm where the bruise had faded to yellow-green. Looked at Emma singing softly to a doll. The old terror climbed up her spine like ice water, the same sensation that had kept her running for 8 years, the same fear that told her she was powerless, that fighting back only brought harder hits. 3 minutes later, another call. Diana Whitfield's voice was silk-draped over steel. "Sofia Sinclair. I know where you are. I know about the child you're harboring." A pause, deliberate, designed to wound. "If you don't return the $50,000 you stole from my hotel." "I didn't steal anything." "Who will believe you? A nobody with no employment history, no family, no one to vouch for your character." Diana's voice dropped, became almost conversational, which made it worse. "I've already filed a police report. Theft, fraud, child endangerment. You have until tonight to return the money or I press charges. After that, the child goes into state custody. And you go to prison." Sofia heard the click of disconnection. She sat on the floor, back against the wall, phone heavy in her lap like a stone. The rain started again. Not the gentle kind, the kind that hammered against windows with the rhythm of a heartbeat refusing to slow. She pulled the tiny pink shoes from her pocket, the ones she'd carried since the shelter, the ones that fit Emma when she was still learning to walk. They were so impossibly small. Sofia had been that small once. She'd learned that being small meant easy targets. Her hand shook so badly she could barely hold the shoes. Emma appeared in the doorway. "Sofia? Come play." Sofia looked at the child, 8 years old, thin as a prayer, eyes that had seen things no child should see. Emma had learned to read disappointment in adults' faces the way other children read picture books. She could sense fear the way animals sense earthquakes. Sofia pulled herself up. "Dialed Nicholas." "They called," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Douglas said I stole from him. Diana said I stole $50,000. They're coming after me. They're going to take Emma. They're going to." "Sofia." His voice cut through her, spiraling like a knife through dark water. "Where are you?" "The apartment. The one you." "Stay there. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. This ends tonight." The line went dead. Sofia locked every door, windows, checked them twice. Emma played with her toys, unaware that the walls of her safety were being tested. Outside, Seattle's evening traffic hummed like a distant warning. What Sofia didn't know was that at 4:13 a.m., 12 federal agents in dark jackets moved like ghosts through the Cascade Hotel. They weren't Nicholas's men, they were FBI, authorized by a federal judge based on evidence Nicholas had carefully compiled and handed to authorities through intermediaries. Evidence of systemic wage theft spanning 6 years. Evidence of witness intimidation. Evidence of tax evasion buried in financial records that accountants had quietly gathered. Douglas Hale was in his small office counting cash when the door exploded inward. Guns drawn. Badges displayed. His eyes went wide, then wider, then broken. "Please," he whispered, collapsing to his knees. "Please, I was just following orders. Diana made me do it. I'll tell you everything." He shook like a cornered animal, hands over his head, reduced from a predator to prey in a single moment. They cuffed him. Read his rights. The same hands that had grabbed Sofia's wrist now hung limp behind his back as they walked him through the lobby in front of the morning staff, everyone watching in silence as the man who'd stolen hope was led away. At the same hour, federal agents surrounded Diana Whitfield's mansion on Queen and Hill. 3 stories of white stone overlooking the city, a house that cost more than most people would earn in a lifetime. Diana answered the door in a silk robe, face perfectly composed. "I think there's been a mistake." The lead agent handed her a warrant. "Diana Whitfield, you're under arrest for federal racketeering, wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit witness intimidation." Her face cracked like porcelain dropped on stone. "Do you know who my husband is?" "A city councilman currently being questioned about his knowledge of your activities." They cuffed her in front of news cameras already assembled outside every major station in Seattle, broadcasting live as Diana Whitfield, socialite and hotel magnate, was led to a federal vehicle, her perfect reputation collapsing on live television. 50 million people saw her face on every screen. Her country club called within an hour to revoke her membership. Her charities released statements. Her lawyer called with numbers that got worse every 30 minutes. At the federal precinct, Douglas took a plea deal within an hour. 40 years in prison in exchange for testimony against Diana. No parole. His voice broke on the last word. Diana refused to break until her lawyer explained the evidence. Financial records going back 6 years. Testimony from 32 employees. Documented threats. Emails. Everything. She received the same sentence, 40 years. Federal prison. No parole. Death would have been too quick. Too easy. Too merciful. This was systematic destruction, assets seized, reputations obliterated, their names attached to cruelty and theft in every news story, every headline, every conversation in Seattle for the next 6 months. Nicholas watched the broadcast from his office. Carlo stood beside him, watching Diana's face crumble on the screen. "The woman, Sofia. She doesn't know you orchestrated this," Carlo said quietly. "She doesn't need to know." Nicholas's voice was steady, like stone. "She needs to heal." What Sofia didn't know was that Nicholas had personally ensured that every woman Douglas and Diana had exploited received restitution. $2 million distributed anonymously through shell companies and foundations. Every stolen tip returned with interest. Federal protection for any woman willing to testify. New identities for women who asked for them. A scholarship fund in the name of every child affected. What Sofia didn't know was that by midnight, the story had spread across every news outlet in Washington. By morning, it was national. Diana Whitfield's arrest trended for 4 days. Douglas Hale's mugshot went viral. The comments section filled with women saying his name, saying Diana's name, speaking their own stories of stolen wages and threats and invisible lives finally seen. Sofia learned about it when she turned on the morning news. There was Douglas in handcuffs. There was Diana in the federal vehicle. There were statements from women with pixelated faces, voices shaking, telling stories that sounded like Sofia's story, like they'd lived Sofia's life, like Sofia's pain had been carried by dozens of people and finally, was being acknowledged in a courtroom instead of whispered in shame. She sat on the floor and cried, not the desperate tears of someone breaking, but the cleansing tears of someone finally witnessing justice move toward the people who deserved it. Emma found her and sat beside her, small hand on Sofia's shoulder. "You're safe now," Emma said, speaking the words Sofia had whispered to her 1,000 times. "They can't hurt you anymore." Sofia pulled Emma close and realized she was right. For the first time in 8 years, she wasn't running. For the first time in 8 years, the people who'd hurt her were the ones with bars on their windows. The people who'd been invisible were finally being seen. The people who'd believed they were untouchable had been touched by the weight of justice and found it crushing. Outside, Seattle's rain fell gentle and clean. The storm was passing. 7 months after that night in the diner, Sofia stood in Nicholas's office on the 42nd floor of the Caruso building, rain streaking the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city of Seattle spreading beneath them like a grid of lights. Emma was downstairs with Carlo and Gino, laughing at something one of them had said, her voice traveling up through the elevator shaft like a song. Sofia had asked for this meeting. She had dressed carefully, a sleeveless shirt under a dark sweater. Her hands trembled as she pulled the sweater over her head and let it fall to the floor. Underneath, 8 years of scars. The map of hell carved across her back and shoulders and arms. Thin lines and deep lines. Some white with age, some still carrying the faint purple of healing. A landscape of pain made visible, each mark a moment she'd survived, each scar a story she'd hidden under long sleeves and careful positioning and the weight of shame that didn't belong to her. Nicholas didn't flinch. He stood across the room, and his dark eyes traveled the length of her back without looking away, without the disgust or pity that Sofia had expected for 8 years. He simply stepped forward and gently touched one scar on her shoulder blade with a single finger, like he was reading Braille, like he was honoring something sacred. "These don't define you," he said. His voice came out solid, like a promise. "They did for a long time," Sofia whispered. The office was so quiet you could hear the rain against the windows, each drop a tiny percussion sound in the silence. "For 8 years, I thought they did. I thought they made me broken. Made me deserving of what happened. But I'm learning they don't have to," she continued. She turned to face him, arms still exposed, no longer hiding. "I'm learning that scars are just proof that you survived something that was supposed to kill you." Nicholas looked at her like she'd just given him permission to breathe again. "What changed?" Sofia pulled the pink shoes from her jacket pocket. The same tiny shoes she'd carried through homelessness and abuse and poverty, the ones she'd kept on her dresser through for months of rebuilding, the ones that had traveled with her through every dark night. She held them in her open palm like an offering. "When I was at the shelter, before everything got worse, a woman gave me these. She told me they belonged to her daughter. She said she'd kept them through addiction and homelessness and abuse, kept them because they reminded her she'd created something good once, even when the world told her she was nothing." Sofia's throat tightened. "She said to remember I was worth more than what had been done to me. 3 weeks later, she died. Overdose. But she gave me these shoes and those words, and I held onto them like they were the only true thing I knew." "You kept them," Nicholas said softly. "I kept them because I didn't believe what she told me. But I wanted to believe. I wanted so badly to believe that I was more than the bruises and the fear and the $78 in my wallet." Sofia's eyes filled with tears that came from healing, not breaking. "And now I finally do. Not because you saved me. But because you showed me I could save myself, and you just stood beside me while I did." Nicholas pulled her close, his arms careful around her scarred back, and Sofia let herself be held by the most dangerous man in Seattle like she was something precious, something worth protecting, something worth seeing clearly. His expensive suit was soft against her bare shoulders. His heartbeat was steady under her ear. For the first time in her life, Sofia felt like she wasn't paying a price for comfort. She was just being held. "Emma's adoption is final next week," she said into his shoulder. "The judge approved it this morning. She's officially ours. Our daughter. Not a ward of the state. Not a child to be separated from. Ours." "I know," Nicholas said. "Carlo told me. She wants you there. At the courthouse. During the ceremony. She's been asking about you." "I'll be there," Nicholas promised. "I won't miss it." Sofia pulled back just enough to look at him. "Nicholas, I need you to hear this clearly. I've rebuilt my life. I'm not the woman who had nothing. I'm not the woman who couldn't fight back. I'm not the woman who hid under bruises and pretended she deserved them. I stand as your equal now. Not your debtor. Not your project. Not your responsibility. Your equal. For a moment, the powerful man who controlled half of Seattle's underworld looked like he might break. His jaw tightened. His eyes glistened with something raw and real. When he spoke, his voice came out thick, like he was pushing the words through concrete. You always were my equal. From that night in the diner when you sat next to a stranger to protect a child. You just needed to see it. And now that you do. He touched her face gently. Now you see yourself the way I've always seen you. The courthouse steps 2 weeks later. Sofia in a soft blue dress that she'd chosen herself, not because she was hiding anything but because it made her feel beautiful. Emma in a white dress with her hair braided, holding both their hands. Nicholas in a tailored charcoal suit, and for the first time, he was standing beside them in full view of the world instead of watching from the shadows. The cameras flashed. The reporters shouted questions. But Sofia barely heard them. She was thinking about the woman who gave her the pink shoes. She was thinking about every moment she believed she was nothing. She was thinking about the night she had $78 and no hope and everything changed because one man looked at her face instead of past it. Emma squeezed both their hands. We're a family now, she said, speaking the simple fact like it was the most important truth in the world. Sofia looked at Nicholas. He looked at Emma. And in that moment, all three of them understood that they weren't a family because of paperwork or law or circumstance. They were a family because they had chosen each other. Because they had survived things that were meant to break them and had broken open instead to let light pour through. The pink shoes were visible on Sofia's dresser in the apartment that was now her home. But they were no longer a reminder of what she'd lost. They were a reminder of what she'd found, that survival could become strength, that invisible could become seen, that broken could become whole again. Some people believe that when you've been shattered, you stay shattered forever. Some people accept the bruises they carry and assume they're permanent marks that define their entire existence. Some people hide under long sleeves and convince themselves they deserve the pain. But Sofia learned something different. She learned that the same hands that held a child in a diner can hold a future. The same heart that was broken into pieces can be reassembled into something stronger than it was before. The same woman who had nothing can build everything. The storm will pass and you are far stronger than you think. Every single one of you watching right now, the things you're hiding, the scars you carry under your sleeves, the moments you believe have defined you, they don't have to. You get to choose what your story means. You get to choose whether broken is the end or the beginning. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Share this with someone in your life who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel because tomorrow we have another story that will change how you see the world. Drop a comment telling us what spoke to you in Sofia's journey. Your story matters. You matter. And remember, being broken doesn't mean you're destroyed. Sometimes it means you're finally ready to let the light in. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We wish you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. We will see you again in the next video.